My name is Sarah Solovitz, and I work in content development at VO Networks. And today I'll be hosting a panel with you all on user-generated content. I'm going to have everybody on the panel briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
Hi, my name is Todd Herman. I am with a small company called Microsoft, and I'm the general manager of global media strategy and monetization for MSN, and started our video product.
Hi, I'm Sayoko Knight, Vice President of Product Management and Marketing for the CBS television station's Digital Media Group.
Hi, my name is Jay Veer. I'm the co-president of NGTV. NGTV stands for No Good Television. We are a producer of uncensored television footage.
Hello, my name is Shane Snoke. I work for the Walt Disney Company in the Walt Disney Motion Pictures Group, and I'm the Senior Manager of Creative Relations, which is a pretty vague title, but basically I'm a special projects guy, and amongst the many things that I do, I report on technology issues to the studio.
So I'm going to start out the panel by talking a little bit about where user-generated content is today. It's sort of my viewpoint that we've had a year where we've talked a lot about user-generated content, but none of us have really figured out where it's going or what it should be. It's my perception that it really is Web 2.0 over, rather than something that's going to be the mainstay of our entertainment business. And I would like to ask each of you guys to respond to that idea.
Well, it's not Web 2.0 over, so you're definitely wrong. The user-generated content, as we want to call it, has a lot of factors to it. The easiest soundbite is to say that user-generated content is to mainstream media what the Ramones were to disco. So what I mean by that is it's not just a joke. And one person laughed, so thank you for recognizing that it is in fact funny. That for the first time in the history of rock and roll, bands started to hear you're overproduced. They started to hear maybe you don't want to wear feathers on stage. Right? And so Joey Ramone, who was an affably likable glue sniffer, actually changed an industry. And it has more in common with user-generated video than you would think, because Joey was great and all, and CBGB's was wonderful. But if you also look at that the time that the Ramones hit was the time that tape duplication became incredibly cheap. And so everybody that saw the Ramones could send it out. So there's that. The other issue is the law of large numbers. And being at a dev conference, I'm going to count on you guys knowing the law of large numbers. But for those of you who are business people, like me, law of large numbers is easiest to explain by, if you look at 10 cells, no one's going to believe they're self-aware. And yet billions of cells are all self-aware. So the law of large numbers dictates that a bunch of things doing stuff together doesn't just change the equation, it changes the yield, what is yielded. And so 20 million people competing against one another to get noticed on YouTube is the first time that we've ever had 20 million people competing against each other to get noticed on YouTube. And so the yield changes. And so Barry Diller is insanely wrong when he says it's just there's not enough talented people. It is the complete change of the aesthetic.
Well, I certainly don't agree that it's Web 2.0 over either. I would say that the web has given us such an infinite amount of distribution that wasn't available before. So that allowed a lot of new user-generated content to kind of come out, and we sensed an explosion originally, obviously, with YouTube and MySpace out there. What I think is going to happen now is quality will win in the end, and we're going to start to see that the user-generated content is going to start to be more better quality, more mature, and essentially be integrated into the other mediums that we have.
My feeling is that there are two kinds of content. There are two schools of thought. The media companies, the big media companies, continue to believe that there's no place for user-generated content. And there's a school of thought which believes that user-generated content is very compelling. I think the verdict is out there. It's the users who decide. And when you go back 10 years, all the big media companies, like traditional print media companies such as Wall Street Journal and New York Times, do have a home on the internet, but you did see that the users really want to know the third-party opinions, and all the blogs and all the individual producers and all the message boards have got a lot of traction, and that has become the users, must-have sites. So I think On the video side, it's very similar. There's a place for big media produced content, but outside the big media, even the creative community, the artists, the celebrities, the producers and directors definitely want to communicate directly to their fans. And there will be an enormous growth of so-called user-generated content in the future.
I would say that it's never over till it's over, as far as Web 2.0 goes. But as much as I love the Ramones analogy, I think it's a little more complicated than that because I don't think mainstream media will ever be where disco is today. And in the case of the Ramones, you know, I mean, punk's not doing so hot these days either. So it's
I don't know. Ask Green Day.
Yeah, well, that's one band though, right?
Blink 182, 311.
Sure. No, I hear you. It's a segment. Whereas you know in the 70s, disco was everything, right? Mm-hmm. So, but I don't think mainstream media will ever go away. But certainly, user-generated content has had a massive impact on the landscape. But I do believe that the wave of the future, whether it will necessarily be quality wins, look, I believe in sort of an underproduced aesthetic. I think you see fantastic movies out there like Memento or 28 Days Later that don't have the miles and above $75 million budgets that look great, and people go to see them anyway. They don't really care if the image is grainy or the special effects aren't perfect. And the same thing can be said of user-generated content. However, as someone who spends a lot of time sorting through what's on YouTube and on Rever and Grouper and whatever, I can only watch so many shots of a guy hitting his roommate in the nuts with a paint can. At the end of the day, I think there's now so much content out there. There's well over 150 different video aggregation sites. I think the next wave is going to be selectivity versus ubiquity because there needs to be some editorship. And that's where mainstream media is going to have a chance to fight back a little bit with the power of branding and sort of quality editorship.
I mean, I think that in terms of, I agree with you. I think that that when mainstream media actually gets into the digital game, things change. I mean, I think at this point we have a lot of people being kicked in the nuts, a lot of cats jumping on trampolines, and not a lot of talented people devoting their time and energy to this kind of work. And I think some of it's because there has not been a model where people besides the mainstream media who hasn't really gotten to the game yet can make money on it. And I think that really does have an impact on quality, and that's coupled with another thing, which is, as it turns out, not everybody wants to be a writer-director. Not everybody in the world does. And if they do, usually they move to New York or Los Angeles and start pursuing that. And if they're talented and they work 20 hours a day, then they have a shot of making it. But if you don't, it's hard to see how there's a sustainable model where people can continue to create work that people are going to see if they're not being paid or rewarded for their work. What do you guys think of monetization?
Monetization. Well, I think I want to get back to this argument one minute because I never said big media was dying, and you made my point about disco by saying disco changed and evolved because it had to. Monetization, what do I think of it? I think it's great. I love me some monetization, don't you all? Raise your hand if you knew where to go see Saddam Hussein get hanged. Okay. Raise your hand if, like me, you saw an ad for a camera phone right before Saddam got hung. I went to YouTube and I saw an ad for a camera phone because someone brought the key phrase camera phone. Right? So the challenge goes right back to the law of large numbers, that there's so much content that how do you monetize that? So the question of what I think of that is, it's going to come, but I believe it's going to be a technological innovation, right? And I believe that just as we're sitting in Vegas, I believe that there's going to be reputation engines for these 20 million, 30 million, 40 million people and the content they create. I think it's going to be akin to a credit score. And I bet you that it's going to be something along those lines where you are predictably someone who's going to bring about a cat peeing in a toilet, or you're going to bring about high art.
Monetization, absolutely. It's just a matter of time. If we were sitting here 5 years ago, we would have probably said the same thing about banner ads, that nobody was making money on them. We just haven't had the scale yet for the content. As much as we think video is big, it's actually not as big from an inventory perspective out there in the market. For user-generated content, advertisers haven't had a place that they can really feel safe to put their brands against. I think that's coming as we have moderation and better quality content. And I think it's just, I hope it's part of the future, otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here.
You know, my sense on monetization, I see it as a no-brainer. The advertisers are willing to support. They might differentiate different categories of user content, and user content in general can be just content from your cameras, or it could be from the creative community themselves who do not have a home with the big media giants. So the semi-produced content does have a lot of monetization potential.
Yeah, absolutely. I think monetization will be it'll be a combination of different things. Obviously, definitely, like Todd said, technology will provide some amazing new opportunities to monetize that space, and it will probably be through sort of algorithm-based technologies and reputation scores and things like that. But also, I think there will be some success with traditional models as well. I mean, advertising seems to have worked since the 1700s. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. I had another thought, but I think I just dropped it.
I think that that's not really what I meant. I didn't really mean monetization in terms of like, yes, clearly like monetization is going to have to happen with anything that occurs. I think really what I was trying to get at is like whether or not the monetization is about networks like a CBS or it's about a creator. Are we changing the way that networks work? Do there have to be studios the way that I'm implying there have to be studios because you have to support creators who work every day? Or does that mean that like, or is there a more sort of haphazard, meta cafe, I've made one video that's had 1 million hits, so I make 25 cents.
Every creator wants to be a network someday. I've rarely met someone who didn't want to be. I mean, I'm coming from a company that started off with a creator that became a massive network. It just seems to be the natural progression of things.
Everybody wants to be a creator.
Everybody who is a creator wants to be a network of their own.
Okay.
I think that used to be true, but for me, the most interesting piece of user-generated content in the past year was the analysis of Arial sans serif versus straight Arial font. And I think you'll all agree with that, right? So that analysis was what led to in my respect to my friend from CBS, but led to some severe career problems for Dan Rather, right, and Mary Mapes. On the story about President Bush's National Guard duty, right? And so was that monetized? Did that person want to be a network? No, that person has a blog about typewriters. Right? So because that person has a blog about typewriters and 19 other people actually cared that, my God, that's Arial sans, that didn't exist. That sort of stuff, the niching of the niching, is going to bring about what I think is more interesting from a monetization perspective, is the almost unavoidable truth that there's going to be a network economy. Right? There's going to be 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 places that you buy advertising. And so even if you hook into the one-hit wonder, it comes from a place like that. So if I were sitting in the seat of a network executive versus a content creator owns what they create. If I were sitting in the seat of a network executive, I would be spending my nights thinking about what I actually own. Because most of them, with the exception, I think CBS owns a good amount of their content, most of them don't own the content. So they're buyers.
I think for monetization for the content creators, which is now what I understand you're asking.
No, I mean, I was actually asking both. I was asking more as like, I think the clear answer is that there has to be monetization. Sure. But the question is like, who is it monetized for is actually, I think, what change has been. So that's what I think the
traditional business model has to change. So the media model today is a writer or a producer create a piece of content and they get distribution and everybody kind of gets a cut along the way. That model is going to have to change for that professional kind of creator to play in this user-generated content world because it's not going to work. It's first of all, nobody's going to make the scale that they make in the current model. So I think there has to be a shift as far as how we reward the content creators. I'm not sure what the answer is on that.
The content produced by media giants right now is very regulated. It is stifling and it's suffocating. There are all kinds of governmental FCC do's and don'ts. So it's the internet opens a platform for artistic free speech. And this platform is very compelling just from the perspective that the creative community, the celebrities, the producers, and the directors, their content is not really filtered by what the media companies want. And it's well known that the media company in many countries are pretty much a propaganda arm for the government. It's not too different in US. There is a strong influence by the government. There's a strong influence by the business lobbies. And they would like to show you everything that they think you should see. And that in itself creates an enormous opportunity for consumers who want to know the truth. And this user-generated platform definitely provides those level of sensibilities of something which is really true and not regulated.
I think individual creators are going to have to be wary of the organizations that they contract with to put advertising on their blog pages. I mean, right now you only have a few people you can really deal with for this. And what they don't have is the bargaining and leveraging power of a major media organization. So they don't want to wind up like the blues musician from the 20s who records a song for $25 and the record company goes off and makes $2 million. That's not going to work for them. So, but what like I said, they're not going to have that bargaining power. So, luckily, the beauty of the internet is that a lot of people can get into the space, but those channels are narrowing because, again, the big companies have big bucks and they're able to monopolize the space.
I'm beginning to feel like I want to hug you now.
Yeah.
Just full disclosure, because I've been asking for years, and this is a little bit self-serving, that YouTube users of the world unionize. Now, one of the fun things about, and by the way, full disclosure, I'm Google interested. I really find them a fascinating company. But one of the interesting things about their economics is they can tweak the black box that they give to their non-partner content providers whenever they want. So go through and read the TOS if you're a YouTube provider, or if you're in any world where they're sharing keyword revenues with you. You don't know what percentage you're getting unless you're partner level. Yep. The law of large numbers and so many sites running that stuff and so many content producers, if you're a little bit short on your quarterly number, what would stop you from saying, well, 0.25% seems a little rich. Let's take this month down to 0.15. So I actually agree with you that there is going to be a new level of savvy for content providers, which though gets back to Sarah's question of, I think you're asking, do networks continue to get paid? Is that what you're asking?
I think that's a good. That's a good question. I don't think it was the original question, but I think it is a question. It's like what happens to the networks? Do the networks remain relevant in a model where what you suggested happens? I mean, I'm not convinced that there will be a unionization as much as there will be greater access to different sets of resources. I'm still a believer that you still have studios because I don't think that creators can sustain themselves. I think for certain cases like one-shot wonder videos where you've made the Saddam Hussein video, those particular people, like that's a random event that happens where someone has a camera. That's different than creating Lost. Yeah. And I think for the most part, people are still going to long for common cultural experiences that are not based on a hanging or a shooting or something, I hope, or something like that.
There's a magic to the networks that how many networks got pitched Survivor before you guys are good to run it? Because there's the whole thing overseas. I don't know if you know this, but they ran the show overseas, and the guy who got kicked out, the first guy got kicked out, killed himself. And Mark Burnett tells this story that it was somewhat of a downer, although great TV. So it got pitched to, and I think Fox and a couple others, that someone somewhere at CBS said greenlight that. Right? So I wonder with the big media companies whether they're going to be happy being distributors or if they're in fact going to start to distribute their content in a new way with hooks in it that cause these black box economies not to function so well with their content. If they're going to take advantage of like a keyword type distribution where they could put it on 10 million websites with their own little black box attacks. And why do they need a Google or an MSN to do that for them?
Yeah. No, I mean, studios and TV networks and other media organizations, they can pay for SEO, they can pay for advertising, they can put their product out there in a way that the most dedicated individual just does not have the physical time to do, let alone the resources. I mean, you can sit on your computer all day and all night and you'll never get your stuff out there as far as they will, except through the the magic of the viral, one-hit wonder. But so there's a real challenge there.
It's a lot easier to make a phone call and put your stuff on the cover of MySpace or YouTube than it is to spend the time of reaching out to 1 million people one by one.
Yeah.
And that's definitely, I think, that part of that dynamic of between the creator and the network, and it's probably why I think the network continues to need to exist.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, the advantages Hollywood has over the individual is experience and resources and distribution, and out of that resources pool, that includes money, equipment, and talent. Now, for the individual, access to some of those things is changing. The cost of digital equipment is coming down. The ability to distribute over the internet is becoming more prevalent. But what a lot of people don't have, and this comes back to the issue of, are we watching cats pee in a toilet or are we watching Lost, is a person who has dedicated their time to, let alone their 9 to 5, to learning the craft of storytelling and to bringing people into magical worlds and experiences. And that's very hard to do.
I'm pretty sure I saw a cat peeing in a toilet and Lost, by the way.
No, but you make this point that is about the idea of large numbers, the idea of networks. I mean, I think I don't firmly agree with you, because I think for the most part, people that want to be writers or directors tend to go to Hollywood or New York.
Understand, I don't make a big deal about the idea of large numbers. I make a big deal about the law of large numbers, that there is a competitive cycle. There are going to be maybe 100,000 folks who are really, really interested in being the top video on a user-generated site, or having the top blog, or having the best blog that deconstructs typewriter fonts on earth, right? Those guys, those people for the first time have the ability to visibly compete against one another and visibly learn from one another. That's never happened before. So across a generation of people for whom creating, quote, content is second nature, like typing on your blog is second nature for kids who were 12 when this whole started. People carrying around video phones that are soon going to be HD, right? The same phone that you have today is going to be HD, capable of making film. That becomes second nature, and applied against that world of the competition to be number one, be that egalitarian or from a monetization perspective, has never occurred. And that does one other thing to the big media companies, which is a time suck. One of the things we have not succeeded in doing is expanding the number of hours in the day. So jokes about bad content aside, it's a time suck. I challenge you to go to stupidvideos.com or Soapbox at MSN and not pack a lunch. Because you may say in this room, you don't watch. Well, yes, you do. Come on, there's a video of a guy lighting himself on fire with Everclear. You're going to watch it, right? And it's going to suck time. So we don't even, sometimes we forget what fragmentation actually means. We talk about the phrase in media, but I think we actually forget that we're now fragmenting from show versus network, show times hours times day, to you have probably, I could make a case for 7 or 8 multipliers for time cutting, right? That's why there must be this network economy, and that's why I'm really interested in seeing the user unionization and some savvy there.
I still think that leaves this presumption that there's a lot more talent there than there might be. And I know I'm making the Barry Diller point, but
it's not about talent.
I think cats lighting themselves on fire is not about talent.
The cat lighting himself on fire is about talent. I'm sorry. If a cat actually lights himself on fire, CAA will sign that cat tomorrow.
It'll be a burnt cat.
It's not about. There are going to be cases where Blair Witch comes out. Blair Witch, user-generated. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they had film degrees. So does my sister. User-generated, but the time, you apply all of these things down to, there's less than, Barry Diller says less than 1% of the people in the world are talented enough to give rise to a hit. That's, do you know what size number 1% of the people in the world is? Then jam that into your 12 hours of viewing time a day. It's about the time suck, it's about the evolution, and about second nature behaviors that we've never seen before.
I still think that leads to a presumption that people don't care about things that are good. And I think that people do care about things that are good and about common cultural experiences as well as identity. At some point, you're tired of watching cats on trampolines, and you want to watch something that you can relax and enjoy.
I went to go watch Lives of Others. It's a foreign film and a subtitle. It's beautifully shot. Of course that exists. But I did it around my media consumption. I'm going to shut up because I'm just monopolizing. So just turn this off.
Well, and it's the same reason. Some people want to watch Lost. Some people want to watch Brothers and Sisters. Some people want to watch Wheel of Fortune. I mean, there's still, even in mainstream media, people have different tastes, and that ranges from the highbrow to the lowbrow there too. So it's also going to be true of user-generated content.
But don't you think the ball game changes when something like, I don't know, Will Ferrell makes a video and 26 million people watch it in one day because it's good, rather than like the other videos that are not as good?
It's so subjective because it's good. Will's funny. Is it good? I don't know, because I think you're, first of all, impugning Pat Sajak, which is, you're going to cross a line pretty quick.
Well, I didn't say so.
Because it's all about Pat. But you're being so subjective because it's good. Well, look.
There's am subjective.
I'm
not
sorry.
Not
there's a school of thought that says if it makes you chuckle, it's good. Right?
I think it's good.
I don't watch user-generated video because I don't like it. It doesn't interest me at all. I'm more interested in the anthropological, sociological effects. I don't watch it because I don't care. I watch 3 TV shows a week. But, you know, so to me, it's just interesting from a mathematical, from an anthropological, sociological point of view.
I think there's still room for people wanting to watch The
You're
Sopranos.
Right. You're right. Is it good? I don't know.
Well, I think it's good if you think it's good, rather than whether or not that there's an objective, like we all in the room agree that it's good.
Well, I would say that if you just want to go down to the share, you could say that 6% of the people in the country agree that Sopranos is great TV.
But I think I'm making a point that goes beyond that, which is more about common cultural experiences that we all sort of long for. The kids in schools, they don't want to watch the only video that they've only seen. They want to watch the Will Ferrell video because they want to see the same thing that everybody else has seen.
We don't disagree.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, moving swiftly along.
Now that that's solved.
Should we move into some questions from the audience? I want to see what you are all interested in.
Well, first of all, can I ask a question? What percentage of you have your own website that's a business for you? Anyone here? Anyone here developing websites for others for money? Right on. So are there any bloggers in the room? Anyone? Keep your hand up if you make more than $100 a month on your blog. Sweet. Stand up. Yeah. How do you make more than $100 a month on your blog? And by the way, your name?
Yeah. Hi. I'm still struggling, but it's definitely more than $100 a month.
What's your blog?
It's a blog network in Germany and Switzerland.
What's it about?
It's about anything. The main blog is about gadgets, like Engadget.
Okay. So keeping with Sarah's question, is it good?
I'm sure he thinks it's good.
Right. So right here, in this room of people, that fast, we find a guy who's making a living at this, about gadgets. So is it good? I don't know if it's good or not, but I knew we could raise our hand, very quickly find someone. Now go back 5 years, raise your hand 5 years ago, try to find someone making more than $100 a month. Right? That's the change I'm talking about. He says it's more than $100 a month. It's a business. He says it's a business.
But haven't we found with blogs, for instance, blogs is a great example. My sister is a writer for a living, and she earns her living off of writing. And a lot of people, many people started a blog with this intent, and what we found is that people that are good, the Andrew Sullivans of the world, are able to make a living off their blog because people enjoy reading their writing, because they're talented writers. Not just writing a blog necessarily entitles you to being a writer.
Let me just kill your point.
Do it.
Drudgereport.com.
Yes.
Matt's a good writer?
I think that it goes back to the...
It's a link page, Sarah, and it competes with Fox and MSNBC and CNN for traffic. It's a link page. Raise your hand if Drudge is your homepage. Oh, God, I love this crowd. Right.
I'm not trying to say that everything is good. I'm not saying that Star Magazine is good because it sells lots of copies. And I'm not saying that nobody on that magazine makes a living earning a living as a writer. But I do think that generally speaking, people that earn their livings off of blogs typically are good writers. Same with being a TV actress or being a TV star.
I don't know. Matt Dillon's had a pretty good career.
I would like to take some questions from the audience. Are there questions, or I'll keep asking?
There's a mic. And then
Yeah, there's a mic in the middle, so
you can
first
be
thing.
on tape. And
All right.
I'd like to hear what all the panelists have to say about, it seems to me that one of the fundamental problems with user-generated content is that all content is generated by people. So someone that gets, generated and distributed under the auspices of a brand, and someone that gets distributed under the auspices of a brand of one, but there's a sort of mythical and false division between user-generated content and non-user-generated content.
No, I told him that.
Oh, can you? Sorry.
Yeah.
Great.
You should take it off there and swing it like Roger Daltrey, too.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. Question I have for the panel is about this false division between user-generated content and non-user-generated content. All content is made by people. Some of it comes out and is distributed as a brand of one, and some of it is distributed by big brands. And I think this is a false and sort of mythical division. It's just small brands and big brands. Secondly, you neglected to mention one thing when you were talking about what networks own. They also own their brands. And it seems to me that user-generated content, the fundamental problem has been that they've abdicated their responsibility to let their brands tell a story on their websites. They've completely gone away from leveraging that in any way, shape, or form, and brands are getting more and more and more diluted in favor of user-generated content. So I want to hear what the four of you have to say.
Well, I certainly think there's a difference between user-generated content and professionally, and that's because one is getting paid to make the content and one is not. Mark Burnett gets paid to create Survivor. The cat lighting themselves on fire is not getting paid.
But they would, you admit. If a cat could light itself on fire.
Yes. So that would be the distinction, I think, of the two areas. And I think it's a very clear distinction. As that starts to shift and we see users creating content and then they're starting to get paid, then they become professionals. And they do get a big name and a big distribution and media company attached to them to distribute their content.
I agree.
Well, wait, there's another point about user-generated content. What is Prince's record label?
That symbol?
Yeah. He doesn't have a record label anymore. So you talk about user-generated content, there's a whole school of entertainers. Amy Mann, Prince, Michael Penn, I could go through a whole list of other ones that are going now artist direct. Does that become user-generated content? They're getting paid, right? I understand the point. Then I agree, by the way, with the distinction. But I believe that also begins to blur, right? Because one of the things I puzzle about is if someone is not a one-hit wonder, and there are those folks that have 3, 4, or 5 times Jib Jab. Remember Jib Jab? Those guys made one cartoon and they leveraged that thing into business, and I've done a lot of business with them. They're very good guys. But they're now a full-on functioning Santa Monica production shop making a lot of money. And you know what they've not done is signed with a network. They have not done it, and if you go to their offices, you can see they're making a lot of money. But were they user-generated when they started that? They learned, they applied the technology tools, and they became a real vibrant business, and they're still users.
No, but I think her point is still the same. I think her point still holds. Once
you're paid, it's
professional.
I didn't say I disagreed.
Okay. I mean, because I think that once you are paid, you become professional.
Well, but they're the same guys. Greg and his brother, the Spears brothers, are the same guys. They're getting paid. But now suddenly it's like all of a sudden they have this stamp of authenticity, like grade A steak, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Jay, did you have something?
We're not differentiating between professional versus non-professional. We're differentiating user-generated versus what's aired by the traditional giant media companies. So when you include in the user-generated content, any content by the professionals which they distribute in a user-generated platform, that would be included. Let us, we can go back and forth, but let's listen to the users, because it's the users who really make a judgment. The user content on internet right now has exploded. YouTube is getting 200 million clip views a day, which is enormous, but all the traditional media companies, MTV.com and Spike TV, and they have had a very, very difficult time to drive consumers to consume their clips on the internet. I mean, there is a demand for user-generated, and the users have spoken about it.
But there's such an, like with the YouTube thing, somehow the hobgoblin people don't talk about is the very nature of user-generated. Here's the distinction to me: that which your friends will watch, right? If you create something, you can almost assuredly get 5 people to watch it. And so if you are a site, a user-generated site, and you have 1 million people and they each get 5 to watch it, that's the good old Web 101 economics. And that's the difference between linear growth models. We started MSN Video, we went very quickly up to 20 million users, and we lost share as user-generated came along because we were subject to the time sink. because there were so many more choices. But the guarantee on a user-generated piece, you can guarantee 5 people will watch it.
Let me just real quick, because I do want to address the branding issue. You're right, I actually did forget to mention that, and shame on me for a company that relies so heavily on its brand. Yeah, so I think part of that issue is also, look, the major media companies, in reality, are just dipping their toes in the water still. They're still not at this full board. They are, one of the disadvantages they have is the malaise and bureaucracy of being giant media companies. They are and they're also very risk averse because they're publicly held companies and they have responsibilities that Joe Blow doesn't have because he's just working for himself. We have to answer to shareholders. So there is a cautiousness. This is, this space is a little bit like the Wild West, and I'm gonna go film school nerd on you now because, from a 100-year-old technology perspective, when the film business was starting out, it had a lot of the same problems that's relevant to this space now in terms of the rampant piracy, patent lawsuits, developing the techniques of the trademarks. Piracy in the early film days was so rampant that film companies began painting their logos on the props so that when people were in the theater, they'd know whose studio made the movie. So they're being very cautious in this space right now because we can't do anything, unfortunately, without spending a ton of money on it. These companies don't know how to move in ways that are cost efficient without, at least on the scales that the individual can act on. Our folks, the average cost of a Hollywood movie today, before you've spent a penny on advertising it, is roughly $65 million. Our people can't pick up a phone without spending thousands of dollars. So they're being very cautious about getting in this space. But that is something that ultimately I think and then also a lot of major media companies. Look, Disney has a brand. We have a brand, which is a blessing and a curse because it is on one end, people have certain expectations of us, and that's great. We're a recognized brand. They know what they're getting when they see Disney. But then by the same token, that also limits what we can do. Other companies, really, a brand. What is Fox's brand? What's their brand? I'm not so sure, and I've actually I'm going to tell tales on some friends at Fox who said, "Oh, it's great. Because we don't have a brand. We can do whatever we want." But I don't think people have any expectations when they say, "Oh, I'm going to watch a Fox product." Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Fox TV has a brand, but
I don't think it's fair to compare the two. The formats, it's one thing to watch a 1-minute clip on a puppy that looks like a chicken online. It's another thing to watch that for an hour at home at night. And the content's just not there.
Is there actually a puppy that looks like a chicken?
Yes, I'll send it to you.
I'd like that link also.
Wait, can I make one point about brands?
We'll go back to one about brands because I have one more comment on copyright. What we also have avoided talking about is that most of the sites we're talking about have built themselves using other people's material that belongs to you guys. Mm-hmm. It's the house that built YouTube was certainly not user-generated content as much as it was other people's content. Mm-hmm. And I think largely that's something that has not been addressed by any of you. We'll come back to the brand question.
Well, no, I think it is a brand question because a lot of people ask me, what did Google buy? And I said, well, they bought 20 million employees who work for free, and they bought millions and millions of hours of other people's footage. And they bought a brand that's self-perpetuated because it had no hangover. It had no, real rules about what YouTube meant. It got to be liquid. It got to be whatever people wanted it to be. Right? And I have a better point about brands, but my friend Sarah says no. So.
Well, let's talk about copyright, and then we'll come back and we'll circle back and rediscuss the branding question. But would anyone like to say anything about copyright, and then we'll have this lovely lady ask a question?
I'm not sure what there is to say about it, but clearly somebody has to pay for the content. It's the copyright owner owns that copyright because they had to pay a large sum of money to get it. To say we support kind of copyright infringement is unfair.
And I think there'll be a cultural change too, because like I said, the blogger who sells out his thing for $25 and AdSense makes $2 million or whatever selling the advertisers and gives him pennies on the dollar for it. Suddenly users are going to become much more savvy about how copyright works and what it means to them.
So who's smart is Paris Hilton, right? Do you agree? Okay, did you know that she had a career prior to the whole sex tape thing? If you have kids, you know that she was a guest on Nickelodeon, right? So the whole thing happened at the Paris Hilton, and the blue shaded footage went out, and Paris had a choice. She could sue and shut that down, because it happens that the guy who sold that doesn't do things without model release. Now, I don't know that he did that with her or not, but that's what he says now in the new issue of Details magazine. So she had a choice. Shut that down, because that's my brand, my name, my copyright, and she apparently made the opposite choice because she did not sue. And she surfed that to the point. Go have some fun, go to live.com or go to google.com and search Marilyn Monroe and keep track of the hits you get, then search Paris Hilton. And you will find out that Paris is orders of magnitude more prevalent online than Marilyn Monroe. Now, Marilyn has the disadvantage of being dead, but her estate also holds tightly onto that brand. And so these quick-moving jib-jab YouTube have the ability to launch from nothing, and there is a new era of branding given that, proliferation.
All right. Would anyone else like to respond to brands before we move on to new questions? No? Okay.
Hello, my name is Anna Hughes. I work for a company called Ascentium, and I've worked with lots of clients who start down this path of, we want to use Web 2.0 because we want to start a dialogue with our customers and we want to get to know them. And yet when it comes time to actually let go of control of the brand in the sense of letting people have a real dialogue, that's really scary. And so a lot of marketing people sit in rooms and they go, wouldn't it be great if we had this honest conversation with our customers? And then when it comes time to actually execute, it's like, well, but shouldn't we moderate it, and shouldn't we control that a little bit and just make sure that our brand stays pure? So my question to the panel is really, at what point, what do you think it is going to take for big brands, or small brands for that matter, any brands, to say, I really am ready to acknowledge that brands don't belong to me anymore in a marketing room. I don't own my brand. The people who consume my brand own my brand. So what do you think it's going to take to get some of those big brands or little brands to sort of let go and say, okay, the brand is out there and it's owned by the people who consume it?
Maybe a recognition that it already happened. Right? I mean, how many Walmart sucks sites are there? Right? So I think that the brand is already owned, but how long will it take them to wake up to realize that? I'll tell you a fun secret. You know the Frito-Lay Super Bowl commercial thing? There were those of us in the industry that started to pitch that to Fritos 4 years ago. Right? Let your users decide your spots. And we're not taking credit for that because they executed on it brilliantly and better than we would have. But it was 4 years ago. So in my jaded opinion, it will take a template that proves the ROI. But the fact that there's properties like adbusters.org that already own your brand, that can already spoof your brand to tens of millions of people, maybe it's already the case.
It's also inherent in the theory of branding that there's that conflict, because branding's about stories, and stories that are interesting are about conflict. And you can't really it's very hard for, I think, brands to ever release stories that are about that set of conflict to begin with. And this is sort of like this current development of what Todd's talking about is a sort of broader scope of that reality.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as a big brand, obviously, I think protecting the brand is still extremely important. Although I think you can really have user feedback and kind of community appeal with the brand in a controlled environment. I know it's not what anyone wants to hear, but I think that you can do it right and you can do it successfully. Our key, being a big media brand is that the advertisers have to trust what you're doing with your brand because that's what they're putting faith in. So, they're not putting faith in brands like YouTube. They just aren't. So there's a sense of trust that they have that we're taking small steps, and that's what they're putting their money in, and we have to be sensitive to that.
Remember the guy who tried to quit AOL? Did you ever hear that, where he said, 47 times in 60 minutes, cancel my service?
Right, exactly.
And the guy's witty repartee was, no, I don't think I'll do that for you today. And so he taped that, he put it up on YouTube. Yeah. And then the next day, AOL did something very predictable. They put out a statement saying, this is not the way we treat our customers. And then somewhere around 2 million people replied to the AOL blog at Netscape saying, no kidding? And so for that 2-week period, who owned that brand? Right. When JetBlue had that terrible thing of parking those people on the runway and the passenger's Bill of Rights was created online, and in a period of 60 days, that woman was testifying before the Senate, right, who had that experience, who owned that brand, JetBlue? Right? And that is the proliferation of the recognition of the fact that that's already occurred. Maybe that's the therapeutic step they need. It's okay, it's out there. Now, how do you glean from people owning your brand? How do you glean the positive and throw it back into your brand machine so you can feed back the great things people like about your brand while they're also doing the negative, which they've never been able to do before?
It's a very tricky area to navigate, I think, because if you look what happened with GM when they had the invited users to create commercials for the Explorer, the S, whatever it was, they wound up getting a lot of commercials that didn't make the product look so great. But in the end, all the news articles and things that were generated like that wound up being a plus for them, and that's great for a truck. But in the case of, again, speaking from my perspective at Walt Disney Company, while I would love to benefit from the tremendous free flow of ideas that's in that great cloud of the net, when you look at a site like sadkermit.com where they've got Kermit the Frog shooting heroin and doing other unspeakable things, they're actually damaging that character. And I don't know how the law applies with parody. It's
what was the site
murky.
again?
Yeah, I don't think I'll repeat it, but hopefully they've managed to get it shut down by now. But in our case, again, Disney's very excited about the internet. I know, look, Bob Iger, we want to be in the space because that's where our customers are, and we want to entertain them in wherever they want to be. If that's where they want to be, we want to entertain them there. But it's a little trickier for us to navigate that space. So I think when you talk about when's the right time to let go of my brand and engage that space, you got to think about what the consequences might be, and then I think you just kind of have to come to that. You have to make a leap of faith, I guess. I don't think there's going to be a hard and fast rule about when to do it, because I think it's going to be different for each company.
Life plus 72.
Yeah.
So I think like the length of the copyright law is when Disney will let go of their brand.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Sir?
Good afternoon. Going on the branding discussion, really quickly, I work for a company that's over 150 years old. They treat their brand like they do own it. They do not want, we're going through a major website redesign. They don't want to release any control. They don't want people to talk about us. They constantly monitor web traffic that's going out there. One of the things that I hear a lot about at a senior executive level is the idea of building sub-brands. And in the case of the company I work for, it's an insurance company. So they talk about creating things like whatifigethitbyatruck.com, where you can read all about why you need life insurance in case you get hit by a truck. So in the case of the Disney brand, it's a horrible example because it wasn't grown internally. But Disney has Miramax, and Miramax is a completely different brand in essence than Disney, and can do a lot of the things that Disney can.
Internally speaking, we also have Touchstone and Hollywood Pictures, so we do have sub-brands. But
I'd be curious as to what the panel thinks about not necessarily getting a subsequent brand through acquisition, but growing a new brand internally.
I'll just go ahead and start. I mean, I may have seen it was only really sort of a small announcement on the business wires, but if I give you one of my business cards right now, it says Buena Vista Motion Pictures Group on it. Nobody knows what that is. So we're actually going to X that out where we are, and more publicly, you've seen we've sort of reduced the production on the number of Touchstone label films that we make, because at the end of the day, our philosophy is we're Disney. Disney is what people know. For better or for worse, we're going to commit to this brand. When you start over with growing a sub-brand, no one knows who you are. And suddenly, you're no different from no matter how big your company is and how much money you spend, to break through the clutter, the social clutter, and to get people to recognize a new name is a real challenge. And of course, there are people who succeed at it, but it's lightning in a bottle, I think. I mean, So I think that's a dangerous proposition unless you've just come up with a name that no one can stop talking about.
I disagree a bit. I think depending on what the product is and what you're trying to build and create, perhaps having an older brand or a more established brand might not work when you're trying to launch a new product, business, or site, for example. In particular, with our brand, people don't think internet necessarily. They don't think digital. They think a very well-known television network. And perhaps in order for us to compete in the digital space, which is a completely different landscape, we need to have more of a different brand. There are situations that we think about branding that may not even attach to the CBS name. So it really kind of depends on the business situation. Because the brand attachment on one distribution side doesn't equate to the other, which is why we partner with distribution companies like Google and Yahoo, because their brands resonate when people go online.
I think there's two cases that I would offer you. One is when McDonald's decided to get street cred, right? A great company, fantastic earnings, all this. And one day someone decided that they needed to get a bunch of street cred. And so they started to try to look like they were very street, and it was silly. And everybody knew it was silly. Whereas you compare that with what Microsoft did with Xbox, and yes, this is a self-serving example. I had nothing to do with it. But the EDD group at Microsoft said, we probably can't launch a video game geared towards fun under the Microsoft name. So if you go back and look at the first Xbox, it came out with just Xbox. And on the back it said, hello from Redmond, much the same way your Zunes. The speakers have gotten Zunes today. Much the way it says hello from Redmond, and eventually you find a copyright. But you know the difference, in my judgment, I don't know, I didn't sit in the McDonald's boardroom when the decision was made. The difference was someone at Microsoft said, hardcore gamers don't want a Microsoft product. They want the effects of it, they want great gaming, they want Xbox Live 360, and now we can call it Xbox from Microsoft. But it came from, forgive me for being so naive, but it came from a position of purity, right? Wouldn't work any other way.
But was there anybody who didn't know it wasn't a Microsoft product in the gaming community?
Yeah, if you go back and you rehash the history of when Microsoft launched that product, they did it so within the game community, those guys knew it. But if you were a hardcore gamer, you knew it because you were solicited for opinion. But if you were walking through the store and you were a kid, you were seeing an Xbox. Yeah. And it did not anywhere say Microsoft. And we did the brand studies, and the brand clearance studies on that was Xbox became the brand, and the primary thought driver, right?
It just depends on what you're trying to do and how far it really is from your core business. I mean, because like Disney, people don't associate Disney with ABC or ESPN, and that's where a lot of your money comes. I mean, 60% of your profits come from ESPN or something like that.
Depends on the year, sure.
But generally speaking, like for Disney, does anyone in the room associate ESPN with Disney?
I do.
Okay, you guys
Some people do. But we consider them to be, they are their own brands. And again, those were acquisitions. They weren't, both of those companies were acquisitions for us, so they had already established their own brand.
I think, though, nonetheless, it's just sort of, if you're trying to be a young, edgy sort of thing, it's less likely that you want to be CBS or Microsoft. So you might sort of try to branch out with your economic power.
The key verb you said to me was trying to be.
Yes.
Hi. We're talking about user-generated content, and we always focus on the production side. While I think that sometimes it's more about the consumption. People tend to say that, YouTube grew with content stolen from the big networks, which is not exactly true, because the users picked up the 15 seconds, the 1 minute that's really worth from an hour video or episode. So what they were doing is that they were using the content, stolen content, but they were providing an alternative way of consuming that content. So do you think this is going somewhere where the consumption is more fragmented? And if so, one of the big advantages of big networks that they can capitalize on big numbers. Will they succeed in capitalizing things that are more on the long tail at the, at the other side?
We launched MSN Video long prior to YouTube, about just after you guys launched Motion, ESPN launched Motion. And it had at that point never been about the content, it had always been about the capabilities, and 3 C's to be precise: condense, control, combine. If we allowed consumers to do that to their heart's content, we won, right? One of the interesting things to play for what you're saying is consumers radically change what they consume when they stream versus watch TV. 5, 6 years now, ongoing national research, very big sample base. We have proven again and again that people who don't watch news watch it online. People who do not watch music videos watch them online because of that control. And then the idea on YouTube is that you can out-TiVo TiVo. Same thing with MSN Video, that you can out-TiVo TiVo. You can get down to the 15 seconds of the show or just the interview with Senator Clinton, something like that, right? So you're describing that. But I would tell you this. 2 things on the YouTube axiom. 1, they stole the content so you always knew where it was. Right? So you have 20 million people using their TiVos to rip content off, put it on that site. When Saddam got hung, that was up in 4 minutes, because I went there at 4 minutes after the event, and it was there. And I knew where it was. So there was always there, and then what we mentioned earlier, right, was that then the gravy is this new thing called user-generated video, and it wasn't, YouTube didn't invent it, but you guarantee 5 people will watch it. So now all of a sudden there's this mix of content, right? But it was very definitely predicated upon, yeah, I know where to get that.
I think more people watched the Justin Timberlake music video on YouTube than they did on NBC sites. It's clearly indicative that they're going to these sites and finding that content there. They're not thinking about the content creator and going to their sites. So it is, the copyrighted content is there. It's taking place on those aggregators. And it's creating the content creators to work with them or find another solution.
I think that there's like an interesting sort of side question to that, and I think that because what that means is that folks really no longer need to go to NBC.com or CBS.com or Disney.com or whoever. There's no more. There's no point in having a sole distribution outlet anymore. Do any of you agree? Do you want to discuss a little?
Well, just now speaking on my own belief, not on behalf of the company, but I'm a believer in sort of hyper syndication or super syndication. I think that ultimately is only good for the product. I think a lot of companies have already reported sort of the cumulative effect of reaching people. When they view their product on a video aggregator site like The Office, let's say, and suddenly NBC notices the ratings are starting to spike for the broadcast. I think when we look at, particularly, let's say, an example of ratings for TV shows, you have to realize 13 million viewers, which is a high number for television now, in a country of 330 million people, that's a pretty small percentage. So clearly, it's better for us to reach them in as many ways as humanly possible. But there is still the monetization issue to think of. So.
Yeah, I don't think you can be too worried about cannibalization at this point in the game. We syndicate all of our video content out to Yahoo. It's available on Yahoo News. And, clearly, is there overlap in audience? Potentially, but I think it's small.
Well, you also just made a deal with syndicating some of your shows everywhere, including we just made a deal with you. You made a deal with Juice and a bunch of other companies.
The network, yes, absolutely did.
Where you guys are really espousing the super syndication model.
Correct. The CBS model has been to syndicate and partner with a lot of the different video sites, so there's not just one source online for any of our content. The key is to kind of monetize it at every possible kind of point of entry.
Hi, Jerry Yen from Total Training. Two quick points. One quick point, one question. First, I don't know if anyone's ever told you, but you look and sound like Mr. Bennett on Heroes. So if I close my eyes...
Sweet. I've never seen the show, but...
Horn-rimmed glasses, gonna look there.
Were you talking to her?
No, to you. All right. The second point, the second question actually is we've kind of danced around what the actual monetization models are, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on what are the actual vehicles of monetization And we've kind of hinted at advertising-supported syndication, potentially it's supporting other vehicles that can therefore increase the ads that you get out of those shows, things like that. But I wanted to get a sense from you what the actual models are you think are going to be successful in terms of actual monetization. Is it ads? Is it for example, MLB.com?
Are you talking just about video?
I'm sorry?
Are you talking just about video?
It sounds like all content.
Yeah, I'm talking about video primarily. The idea being, how do you actually make, what are the actual vehicles to make money? MLB.com is subscription. Other ways might be, you don't make money directly, but you support other ad-supported ways to make money. Whatever it is, I guess I'd be interested in hearing how do you actually make money off of video?
Well, we had insane success with the TV ads in MSN Video. I mean, they're literally insane. We got more top 100 brands to come in on that product than you would imagine. I mean, and it happened very quickly at multiples against which they pay for TV. And they pay those multiples because, as I was talking to the gentleman earlier about the changing behaviors, the very people you mathematically cannot reach enough on TV with enough frequency, mathematically can't, they're hard to avoid online. And it's referred in the industry colloquially as the fifth quintile. They continue to be very prevalent in streaming. So in that case, it was very easy to take a TV ad and throw it online. And by the way, it made the TV ad buyers, very comfortable. So now there's a big, huge push to change the aesthetic. Because yes, grafting that 30-second ad worked very well for monetization, 15-second ad worked very well for monetization, but now the user need to kind of flow through their experience is colliding with that. So I don't think we're going to get away from video ads. I just don't think those are going to go away in that environment. But I do think they're going to shrink, and I think that they're going to be very short, but give users 1,000 ways to expand it so that you could turn a 5-second ad into a 60-second infomercial for a Corvette.
I think he was asking more of a question about what the actual monetization.
I think it's going to be advertising. I don't think subscriptions work for stuff you can't get elsewhere. If you can't get it elsewhere, you can sell it for a subscription, but I've never seen it work for content that you can get in a free form. Consumers, turns out, prefer free.
You know, it's very difficult today to reach the young demo, the 18 to 34, and they're not watching television. The only place where advertisers should be reaching them is online, if they can find a place where they spend all the time. And
the advertisers, though, are not ready for any new models at this point. They have been the reason why you haven't seen a significant shift. I think consumers are absolutely open to new kind of forms of advertising. I agree that subscription is going to be few and far between. Potentially on mobile devices is one area for subscription, but for content that's available for free, it's going to be very hard to monetize through subscriptions.
I speak at events for advertisers, and I speak at a lot of them like Digital Hollywood or Ad Tech. For 4 years, I made the following offer. I had offered advertisers that I would pay for the research to prove that an ad created for the medium, being online video, would outperform a repurposed TV ad. I also upped the offer saying, I'll pay for the creation of the creative. 4 years, I had one brand take me up on it. That brand was a TV network. And you want to know the dirty secret is? They don't want to know. There is no money in changing the model for them. But it is going to change. But I don't think we'll get away from video ads, and I do think it will be ad-driven.
There'll also be more product placement, more branded entertainment, which I think that you're already seeing that there's a lot of brands that are literally paying for the content that the studios aren't paying for at this point.
Yeah.
And that's where, at this point for advertising agencies, they're not getting the money that they can't afford to be making ads for the internet because they don't cost $1 million each the way that ads for TV do. And so there's a lot of advertising agencies that are moving into more interactivity and more branded entertainment, which is purpose for the internet, but still costs $1 million.
The Milton Berle show used to be the Texaco Star Theater, so it's the models they really sort of already exist. But in terms of what's out there now, I just don't see anything that can compete with advertising. I don't think Apple has seen massive success with iTunes. It's sold a lot of iPods, but the actual download to own part, yeah, they're making some money, but the content creators certainly aren't. And subscription models. I think the MLB thing works because I think you get a great value for what you're paying for. But in other cases, I think MovieLink has said at various times that rarely are people paying to stream or to it's really advertising seems to be the one that works the most. But I think there's more room for innovation in that space. I haven't seen any people branding the edges of their video player yet. And I don't know why you're not doing that. Yeah. That's something they're looking at the whole time the video's up.
To be fair, by the way, Xbox Live launched Xbox Live Marketplaces, which has subscription video, and they've been very, very happy with how it's performed. But echoing what you're saying, it's just orders of magnitude below 330 million consumers that advertisers will pay to reach.
I feel like I talk a lot about people selling T-shirts and merchandising because I really do reckon that that's how musicians make their money is by selling T-shirts and merchandise and live shows. So it's sort of dependent on the kind of content that you're actually talking about as well. Are there any more questions? Any more questions?
Let me comment on the ad revenues. While we are discussing the effectiveness of campaign, it's been proven that the banner ads by Google and Yahoo right now are north of $10 billion a year. So there must be merit to a lot of advertisers paying for it.
Well, thank you all for participating both in the discussion and the panel. If there's any other questions, final thoughts. Great, thanks guys.
Thank you.